In a forgotten corner of Judea, among stone alleyways and scent of freshly baked bread drifting from homes at dawn, Agabus was born. No trumpet sounded to announce his arrival, nor were songs composed in his honor. He was just another child in a humble family, living in an era when each day was a struggle to survive. Yet there was something about him that caught people's attention. He wasn't particularly handsome, strong, or outwardly different. It was his gaze, a deep, penetrating look, as if he were always seeing something others could not. While other children ran through alleys playing war with sticks, Agabus would often stand still in a corner, gazing at the sky, listening to the wind rustling through olive trees, attuned to silence. There was a restlessness within him, a constant feeling that something immense, greater than himself, was about to happen. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful biblical stories, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single video. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting our work with a financial contribution by clicking the Value button. You can also become a channel member and enjoy exclusive benefits. Years passed, and he grew carrying that unease in his chest. It wasn't pain, but neither was it peace. It felt like an invisible hand pushing him forward, even when he wanted to stay still, as if life itself whispered in his ear, "Be ready." He didn't know for what, or when, or how. He only knew this call came from a place he couldn't ignore. One day, as a young man, he felt such a powerful pressure in his chest that he nearly collapsed. It happened during a simple gathering of believers, ordinary people meeting to pray and share bread. In the middle of prayer, an image flooded his mind like a storm. Desperate people, parched fields, mothers holding their children, weeping for food that didn't exist. The vision was as clear as daylight. He tried to ignore it, but the image returned again and again. It was as if he were being forcibly pushed forward. And in that moment of silence between breaths, Agabus could no longer pretend it was just his imagination. Want to deepen your spiritual life? Click on the first comment and get your free fasting and prayer guide now and transform your spiritual journey. Discover the power of fasting and prayer to experience true transformation. Agabus stood there, heart pounding like a drum, the vision of hunger still spinning in his mind. He tried to hide it, but his eyes betrayed him. One of the brothers approached, gently touched his shoulder, and asked, "Are you okay, Agabus?" He only nodded, but inside it felt as if something had broken open and spilled out forever. In the days that followed, the feeling only grew stronger. It wasn't fear, it was a silent call, a kind of urgency that gave him no rest. He woke up before dawn with a racing heart and a strange warmth in his hands, as if they were made to hold something sacred, invisible. He felt God was trying to speak to him, not with thunderous voice, but with whispers piercing through his chest. That's when he began noticing small things. A bird flying unusually low, an old man saying something by chance that seemed to answer a question he hadn't even asked. Everything seemed to carry hidden meaning, as if the world around him had started speaking a new language, one only he could understand. But he still didn't know what to do with it. If he spoke too much, they'd call him mad. If he stayed silent, he felt he would explode. So he did what he could. He prayed intensely, sometimes on his knees, sometimes pacing back and forth, eyes fixed on the sky. He asked for wisdom, for guidance, for courage. Without realizing it, that quiet boy began to change. Gradually, people began to notice. He spoke little, but when he did, it was as if time stood still. His words carried weight, not mere knowledge from books, but something deeper, something from within, as if heaven itself were speaking through him. Then came the moment, during one of these gatherings, when he stood up and no one blinked. It was as if the air had grown heavier, denser, like the moment before rain. Agabus, hands slightly trembling, looked around and said, "The Lord has shown me that a great famine will come, one that will spread across the land. Even Rome will feel it." It was like lightning on a clear day. The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Some frowned. Others exchanged glances, wondering if they'd heard correctly. But he didn't stop. He began describing scenes no one wanted to imagine. Empty granaries, markets without grain, mothers dividing the last piece of bread among their children. Each word filled the room like a distant drum, beating, beating, beating. It was impossible not to feel it. His words were arrows piercing the soul. People held back tears. An older man in the back turned pale and gripped his wife's hand. Agabus didn't shout or deliver speeches. He spoke quietly, firmly, as if he were already watching it all unfold before his eyes. And strangely, no one thought he was lying. However harsh and heavy the message, no one stood up to deny it. The scenes he described weren't just words. They were almost tangible. You could smell burnt wheat, hear the muffled cries of someone begging for food. When he finished, he didn't apologize or explain. He simply sat down, face solemn, sweating cold. It was as if he had delivered a burden that wasn't his own. Silence hung in the air, heavy as a stone on the chest. Then someone stood up, stepped into the center, and asked, "If the famine truly comes, what will we do?" The question lingered. What will we do? It wasn't just a doubt. It was almost a plea, as if suddenly everyone present had felt the weight of the prophecy and knew deep down they couldn't go on as if nothing had happened. The days that followed were strange. Gatherings once filled with joy and song now began with long silences. No one wanted to speak first. Everyone looked at Agabus with a mix of respect and fear, as if he were a mirror showing a future no one wanted to see. And it wasn't long before the news spread. People from other towns began arriving just to hear what he had said. Some came with doubts, others with wide eyes, but all left changed, not because Agabus spoke beautifully, but because his words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Slowly, reactions began. Some leaders tried to pretend it wasn't serious. "God will provide," they said with forced smiles, trying to keep calm. But deep down, they knew it wasn't just a saying. Others, more practical, began gathering supplies, organizing offerings, planning how to help believers in poorer regions. That's when Agabus's role began to change. From a terrifying prophet, he became a reference point. He didn't give orders or lead with shouts, but everything that happened somehow passed through him, as if that vision had placed him in a position no one else could occupy. And without wanting it, he was pushed to the center of it all. The famine didn't arrive with a crash, nor with thunder or sudden disaster. It came slowly, like a dry wind silently stripping green from the land. First, wheat began to disappear from markets. Then oil became too expensive. Families started slicing bread thinner and thinner, until one small piece had to last all day. What Agabus had seen began to unfold before everyone's eyes. Doubt was no longer possible. It was reality knocking at the door, and there was no escape. Cities across the Roman Empire, one by one, began to feel the weight of scarcity. Antioch, one of the richest, became a symbol of what was coming. Even the most skeptical now spoke Agabus's name with seriousness, almost with reverence. In Jerusalem, the situation was even worse. Many Christians were unemployed, marginalized, surviving on donations and the goodwill of fellow believers. The city's streets, once filled with voices and footsteps, now echoed more with silence and the groans of those crying for food. But the most surprising thing was what this crisis stirred in people's hearts. Where despair was expected, generosity bloomed. Churches that barely knew each other began to unite. Some sent coins, others sacks of wheat, others clothing and even tools. The network of faith spread like a blanket woven by invisible hands. And Agabus remained steadfast, helping to organize, advising, praying with the brothers. He didn't seek leadership, but it found him. His presence brought direction, like a compass in the midst of a storm. And it was on this path, between prayers and secret meetings, that he learned of something even more serious coming from heaven, something involving a man named Paul. Through all of this, while the city struggled with hunger and believers did everything possible to help one another, Agabus never stopped. He went from house to house, carrying sacks of flour on his back, distributing food, offering words of encouragement, like someone handing out blankets in an unrelenting winter. He had no luxuries, no stage, only dust on his feet and truth on his lips. Even those who didn't understand much about faith knew it. Wherever Agabus went, something changed. Children ran to see him pass. Mothers made signs from doorways. Elders whispered quietly, as if in the presence of someone who saw beyond. And he did see beyond. It was as if God had drawn a map inside his mind, guiding every step. But what few knew was that behind that calm was a burden, a weight only he carried. Sometimes he'd step away from the group, sit on a random stone, look at the sky, and remain silent for hours. It was in these moments that he received more than food. He received visions, messages, images that came like lightning. Fast, sharp, powerful. And in one of these visions, he didn't see dry fields or hungry children. He saw a man, Paul, the same man many had heard preach, who had traveled across the world spreading the gospel. But what Agabus saw wasn't preaching. It was prison, chained soldiers, an angry mob, Paul's name shouted amid shoving and stones, and then silence. At that moment, Agabus didn't understand everything, but he knew this wasn't just any image. It was a warning, a sign that something immense was about to happen. Something that didn't concern Paul alone, but the entire journey of the faith itself. And he knew that this time, he would have to speak again, loudly, before everyone. The room was full. It was one of those gatherings where believers came from far away, some traveling for days, just to hear a word, share a meal, renew their strength. Agabus arrived quietly, as always. But that day, there was something different about him. Deeper eyes, firmer steps, carrying something hidden. And everyone noticed. Midway through the meeting, when singing ceased and conversation turned to prayer, Agabus stood up. He took a belt that belonged to Paul, a simple piece of old, worn leather. Holding it in his hands, he spoke firmly. The Holy Spirit says, "The owner of this belt will be bound in Jerusalem, handed over to the Gentiles." A chill ran through the room. Some looked at Paul. Others covered their mouths. This wasn't just a warning. It was an omen, the way Agabus tied his own hands with the belt, as if reenacting the arrest before everyone, made it even more real. It wasn't just prophecy. It was a living scene before the eyes of those who didn't want to believe. Paul watched, unblinking. There was no panic on his face, only a hard, heavy silence. He understood instantly. What Agabus had seen was true. It didn't come from a man's mind, but from heaven. And this message carried a destiny no one there would dare to desire. The gathering turned to weeping. Many tried to convince Paul not to go. They begged him, pleaded, "Stay here, wait a little longer." But Paul's gaze was already far away, like one who accepts the cost of the calling. Agabus said nothing more. He placed the belt back in his hands, looked at his brother one last time, and walked away in silence. He knew what would come next wouldn't be easy, but still, it was only the beginning of what God intended to reveal. After that day, tension lived between the lines of every conversation. No one spoke loudly. No one smiled for long. The image of Agabus, hands bound by the belt, lingered in everyone's mind like a persistent shadow, one even the strongest sun couldn't erase. Some began to whisper. Was it really God who spoke? Others wanted to believe Agabus was just tired or had misinterpreted. After all, Paul was one of the most important names among them. How could they accept that he would be arrested? It made no sense. It was like sending a warrior home before the final battle. But Agabus's gaze left no room for doubt. He didn't try to convince anyone, not because he needed to, but because some truths don't need to be shouted to be felt. They stand firm, like a flame that cannot be extinguished, even if it burns your hands. And Paul didn't retreat. Despite all efforts, despite heartfelt pleas, he remained determined. "I am ready," he said, not only to be imprisoned, but even to die if necessary. Was it courage or madness? Perhaps both, but it was truth. The same faith that drove Paul was what held Agabus in silence. Meanwhile, the city stirred. Rumors ran through alleyways. Some said the Romans already knew of Paul's arrival. Others claimed an ambush was being prepared near the temple. It was like a barrel of gunpowder waiting for a spark. And everyone knew the spark was about to fall. Agabus withdrew for a few days. He was seen on the mountain, alone, praying as if speaking face to face with heaven. And there, amid wind and stone, he saw another scene, a chain, a ship, and Paul gazing at the horizon with eyes full of faith. Paul walked Jerusalem streets with a mix of calm and tension. He knew what awaited him, but there was no turning back. The voices urging him to avoid the city, the warnings from friends, none reached his heart. He carried a greater certainty. a strength not from men, but from something invisible, unshakable. There was a moment he considered giving up, boarding a ship far from here, fleeing the danger. The idea seemed tempting. Calm seas, distance, the chance to continue his work without threats. But it was as if a strong wind blew against him, pushing him forward toward the inevitable confrontation. Slowly, that thought gave way to a clear decision. He had to face what was coming, not out of empty bravery, but because he believed the path set for him could not be interrupted. It was surrender, acceptance of what others called fate. But for Paul, it was a mission. And through it all, Agabus's prophecy echoed in his mind. Invisible chains binding him before iron ones. Hands tied, the belt symbolizing a captivity not easily endured. But Paul wasn't alone. Despite the risk, people surrounded him, praying, supporting, encouraging him to go on, even through fear. A small but firm group, each carrying hope in their eyes, even when the road grew dark. With firm steps and a determined heart, Paul moved forward into what he knew was the beginning of a new chapter. But neither he nor anyone there could imagine what was truly about come. Paul's arrest happened exactly as Agabus had foretold. But no one was truly prepared for the weight of that moment. The metallic sound of chains echoed through stone corridors, a sound screaming into the silence of the dungeons. It was the clinking of reality, the mission becoming heavier, more real. As Paul was led away, the brothers watched in silence, knowing the future was now being drawn in twisted, uncertain lines. Agabus's words were no longer distant prophecies. They were life unfolding before their eyes. He remained there, standing firm, gazing at the horizon, knowing the journey wasn't over. But imprisonment wasn't the end for Paul, or for what he represented. The letters he wrote from prison, the words born in the darkness of cells, conquered the world. They were seeds sown in fertile ground, transforming hearts and minds far beyond anyone's imagination. And Agabus, he remained the one who saw first, who announced first, who lived it first. An ordinary man, touched by a calling, capable of bearing the weight of truth, even when it was too hard for others. Agabus's story doesn't end with the clinking of chains or the silence of prisons. It lives on in every act of courage, in every voice rising against fear, in every hand extended to help a neighbor. And it is in this movement, in this dance between vision and action, between warning and surrender, that we find the true meaning of hearing and answering a call. And so, as the pages of history continue to be written, the next chapter waits to be revealed. After all that happened, one thing is clear. Agabus's life was far more than simple prophecies. He was someone who accepted a burden many would flee. Someone who, without seeking the spotlight, stepped into the impossible. His courage wasn't in grand gestures or empty words, but in quiet strength, in the willingness to be the voice for what the heart hesitates to face. Agabus teaches us that hearing a call isn't just about hearing pleasant words. It's understanding that sometimes what comes with is hard, uncomfortable, and yet must still be spoken. That prophecy, warning, mission must not be hidden or denied, even if it brings fear, doubt, or rejection. It must be carried with humility and truth, as he did. Moreover, his story shows that being called doesn't mean being alone. Even in the fiercest storms, like the famine that shook the Roman world or the looming imprisonment of Paul, there was an invisible network of support, faith, and action. Agabus was part of a greater movement, a reminder that when one person rises, many are touched and transformed. Finally, Agabus's life challenges us to look beyond what is easy and comfortable. His courage lay in facing the future, even when it brought hardship, and saying, "I will speak. I will act." Because in the end, what truly transforms isn't just words, but what we do with them. And it is in the story of voice, courage, and surrender that we find inspiration for our own callings, whatever they may be, knowing the path may be difficult, but it is worth walking. And just as Agabus did, we too are invited to continue the journey, attentive to what time will yet reveal. If you enjoyed Agabus' story and want to keep exploring stories of faith and perseverance, don't forget to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you never miss new content. Together, we'll uncover more powerful lessons from the Bible